May 29th, 2026, 11:47 p.m. local time. 12 Tu-95s Bear H strategic bombers sit on the tarmac at Engels Air Base, engines cold and silent. Ground crews move through the darkness in organized columns. Fuel trucks, weapons loaders, maintenance personnel. The scene looks routine, procedural, safe. It isn't. Somewhere above the cloud layer, a constellation of sensors has been watching this exact moment for 73 days. Satellite passes. SIGINT intercepts. Agent-sourced reports buried in encrypted traffic. Ukraine's military intelligence has been building the most precise pattern-of-life analysis ever constructed around Russia's long-range aviation cycle. Tonight, every data point converges on a single window. One depot, one salvo. 11 days of grounded Bear H capacity. This is the story of how Ukrainian intelligence didn't just strike a target, they struck a system. And in doing so, they achieved what no single missile barrage had managed in 4 years of war. I'm your host at War Vector, where we analyze the battles that change wars. What you're about to understand isn't just a strike mission. It's a masterclass in pattern recognition, intelligence patience, and surgical precision. The kind of operation that intelligence professionals study for decades, and that Russia never saw coming until the first impact crater was still glowing. Stay with me, because what unfolds over the next 73 days, and the 41 seconds that ended them, rewrites the calculus of strategic bombing campaigns entirely. Engels Air Base sits along the Volga River in Saratov Oblast, roughly 900 kilometers northeast of the Ukrainian border. For most of this war, it has been the engine of Russia's cruise missile campaign against Ukrainian cities. The Tu-95s Bear H, a Cold War-era turboprop strategic bomber that first flew in 1952, remains Russia's primary Ho-101 cruise missile delivery platform. Don't let the age fool you. These aircraft can carry up to 8 Ho-101 missiles each, with a range of 5,500 kilometers and a circular error probability under 5 meters. A single Tu-95 at maximum capacity represents enough firepower to flatten a city district. Russia has been using them to do exactly that. Through late 2025 and into 2026, Engels maintained a rotational strike tempo of roughly one major sortie package every 12 to 14 days. 12 aircraft, pre-staged, fueled, armed, launched in staggered waves toward Ukrainian population centers. Kiev, Kharkiv, Odessa. The pattern was punishing in its consistency. Ukrainian air defense. Patriot systems, NASAMS batteries, interceptor aircraft had become extraordinarily effective at neutralizing inbound Ho-101s in flight. But even a 20% penetration rate from a 96 missile salvo means 19 cruise missiles reaching their targets. 19 chances for a shopping mall, a power station, a residential tower to disappear in a fireball. Ukrainian military planners understood this arithmetic better than anyone. Shooting down missiles after launch was necessary. Preventing the launch entirely was decisive. The question was how. Which weapon represented the greater strategic threat to Russian long-range aviation? The HIMARS precision strike system with ATACMS munitions, or the intelligence collection apparatus that identified the target in the first place? Comment below. The answer might surprise you. The intelligence work that made the May 29th strike possible didn't begin in May. It began in October 2025, when Ukrainian military intelligence analysts noticed a subtle but significant change in Engels' operational signature. Russia had a problem. The Ho-101 production lines, already stressed by wartime demand and Western sanctions cutting off precision components, were producing missiles faster than they could be transported efficiently from central storage to airfields. The logistics chain from weapons depots to tarmac was consuming critical turnaround time, sometimes adding 6 to 8 hours to pre-sortie preparation cycles. Russian planners, under pressure from the general staff to maintain strike tempo, authorized a fix: forward staging. A depot facility approximately 40 kilometers from Engels, near the town of Tarkani in Saratov Oblast, would serve as a pre-positioned weapons and fuel cache. 101s would be transported there in advance, kept ready, with fuel trucks pre-staged for rapid deployment to the airfield when a strike package was authorized. The logic made sense from a Russian planning perspective. Reduce airfield activity during pre-strike preparation. Accelerate the loading timeline. Keep the main base signature lower until the final hours before launch. What the Russians didn't account for was that this forward depot created something more dangerous than the original dispersed logistics chain. It created a choke point. Ukrainian satellite imagery analysis first flagged anomalous vehicle movement patterns at the Tarkani facility in late October 2025. The initial read was inconclusive. The site had functioned as a motor vehicle maintenance depot and wasn't unusual on its face. But 3 things caught the analysis cell's attention. First, The vehicle signatures included heavy transporters consistent with weapons-grade cargo. Second, the movement patterns showed a regularity inconsistent with maintenance operations. Predictable arrival windows, predictable departure sequences. Third, and most critically, the movement spikes at Tarkani preceded Engels launch operations by exactly 48 to 72 hours in two separate observed cycles. Correlation, not yet causation. The intelligence team expanded collection. SIGINT assets began targeted intercept operations against communication signatures associated with the facility. Agent networks in the Saratov region were tasked with source development around the logistics infrastructure. Over the following 6 weeks, a picture emerged that was more complete and more operationally significant than anyone had initially projected. The Tarkani depot wasn't just a fuel cache, it was the weapons pre-staging hub for the entire Engels strike package cycle. Russia had effectively centralized the most vulnerable phase of its H-101 preparation pipeline, the movement from storage to aircraft, into a single facility with predictable operational rhythms. The fuel distribution manifold feeding the depot's 6 primary tanker vehicles was a single point of failure structure. The missile storage configuration placed approximately 60% of a pre-staged strike package's inventory within a 400-meter blast radius during the active loading phase. Working through the intelligence assessments that Ukrainian analysts would have been reading in those weeks, one detail kept standing out. The depot wasn't just a target, it was a timer. And Ukraine was watching the countdown with extraordinary patience. By February 2026, Ukrainian military intelligence had enough pattern confidence to begin planning. The operational question wasn't whether to strike the depot, it was when. Striking too early, before a full strike package was pre-staged, would destroy material but leave infrastructure intact and operational tempo only briefly disrupted. Striking at the optimal moment, when maximum H-101 inventory was concentrated at the facility, could achieve something qualitatively different. Not just damage, but operational paralysis. The planning cell at the General Staff identified 3 criteria for an optimal strike window. First, maximum H-101 inventory concentration, ideally 60% or more of a pending strike package present at the depot. Second, fuel trucks actively engaged in the preloading sequence, making the manifold infrastructure maximally vulnerable. Third, ground crew density high enough that the strike would also degrade the specialized technical personnel Russia needed for rapid reconstitution of loading operations. Here's what most people assume about precision strike campaigns, that the weapon system is the hard part. It isn't. The weapon system is the easy part. Identifying the target, characterizing its vulnerability, timing the engagement window. That's where modern warfare is won and lost. What happened at Tarkani wasn't primarily an ATACMS story. It was an intelligence story. The ATACMS was simply the delivery mechanism for 73 days of analytical work. Then, in early March 2026, the timeline nearly collapsed. A change in Russian communications protocols at the Tarkani facility suggested either a security review was underway or operational procedures were shifting. Movement patterns that had been reliably predictable for 4 months became erratic for 11 days. The analysis cell couldn't determine whether the Russians had detected Ukrainian collection efforts, whether the forward depot concept was being modified, or whether this was simply a temporary administrative disruption. If the protocols had changed because of a security compromise, the entire operation was at risk. Not just the strike plan, the intelligence networks that had built the picture. The decision was made to pull back collection intensity temporarily, reduce the SIGINT footprint around the facility, let the pattern breathe. Trust that if the operational concept was still valid, the signature would reemerge. It did. By mid-March, the movement patterns returned, slightly modified in their timing windows but structurally identical in their operational signature. The Russians hadn't detected Ukrainian collection. They had conducted a routine procedural review and implemented minor adjustments. The intelligence picture was intact, but the episode reinforced a critical constraint. The strike window, when it opened, would have to be acted on rapidly. Extended observation periods carried compounding detection risk. When the criteria aligned, the decision cycle had to compress from days to hours. Stay with me. What happens in the next phase of this operation dismantles an entire strike package before a single Tu-95 can reach launch altitude. Between March and May 2026, Ukrainian intelligence tracked 2 near-optimal windows that fell just short of the established criteria. In the first, 101 inventory concentration reached approximately 48%. Significant, but below the threshold planners had calculated was necessary for the desired operational effect. In the second, inventory levels were adequate, but fuel truck concentration indicated only 3 of the 6 manifold connections were active, suggesting the depot was supporting a partial rather than full strike package. Both windows passed without a strike decision. The patience required for this kind of disciplined waiting is almost impossible to overstate. Ukrainian cities were absorbing Russian missile strikes during this period. Every week without action represented a continued threat to civilian infrastructure and lives. The pressure to act on an imperfect window was real and constant. The general staff held the standard. Subscribe to War Vector if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Not simplified narratives, but the actual decision calculus that shapes the outcome of conflicts. May 27, 2026. Satellite imagery analysis detected the beginning of what the collection team immediately recognized as a full package pre-staging cycle at Tarkani. Heavy weapons transporters, tracked from Engels storage facilities, began arriving at the depot in the late afternoon. The fuel distribution manifold, that single critical piece of infrastructure feeding all 6 primary tanker vehicles, was confirmed active across all connection points by early evening. By May 28th, the inventory picture was resolving. 101 missiles, assessed through multi-source imagery analysis, had reached a concentration level consistent with approximately 65% of a maximum strike package. 6 of the 12 Tu-95s assigned to the rotation cycle were in active pre-flight preparation at Engels, with ground crews conducting fuel transfers and systems checks. The depot was supplying the weapons load for all 6 aircraft simultaneously. The 3 strike criteria were met simultaneously, for the first time in 73 days of collection. The decision authorization cycle, which Ukrainian planners had pre-coordinated to compress to under 4 hours once criteria were confirmed, moved with controlled urgency. Target packages, built over months, refined with each additional collection cycle, were pulled from the planning system. ATACMS fire missions were generated for a coordinated salvo targeting 3 distinct aim points at the Tarkani facility: the primary Ho-101 storage configuration, the fuel distribution manifold infrastructure, and the 3 mobile weapons loading platforms tracked to the depot's eastern loading apron. How many Ho-101 cruise missiles did the May 29th strike effectively neutralize or destroy through depot destruction and operational disruption? A 31 missiles, B-58 missiles, C-76 missiles? The answer at the end. And it tells you something important about the cost efficiency calculation Ukrainian planners were working with. The ATACMS, Army Tactical Missile System, is a surface-launched ballistic missile with a range of up to 300 kilometers in its extended range variant, carrying a unitary warhead with devastating terminal effect against hardened logistics infrastructure. Ukraine had received significant ATACMS inventories through 2025 and into 2026 as part of ongoing U.S. military assistance packages, and the precision guidance system had proven highly effective against high-value fixed and semi-fixed targets throughout the conflict. For the Tarkani strike, the targeting solution called for a coordinated time-on-target salvo. Multiple ATACMS rounds from different launch systems arriving within a narrow time window to prevent dispersal of personnel or equipment between impact events. The first generation of impacts would target the He-101 storage configuration. A near-simultaneous second wave would engage the fuel manifold. A third impact sequence would address the mobile loading platforms on the eastern apron. The math of what this would accomplish, if executed to plan, was stark. The weapons inventory at the depot represented 65% of the Ho-101s pre-staged for the pending strike package. Destroying them meant Russia's planned 6 aircraft sortie, potentially 72 cruise missiles, couldn't fly. The fuel manifold destruction meant that even if Russia rushed replacement weapons forward, the distribution infrastructure needed to fuel the Tu-95s at launch tempo would be offline. And the loading platform destruction meant the specialized equipment for transferring Ho-101s from transport to aircraft hardpoints would need replacement or repair before operations could resume. If you believe tactical patience wins wars, type War Vector in the comments. May 29th, 2026, 11:47 p.m. The Tu-95s are cold on the tarmac. Ground crews move through the Tarkani depot in the organized pattern Ukrainian intelligence has studied for 73 days. Fuel trucks in their designated positions, weapons transporters at the loading apron, the depot lit by low-level work lighting against the Saratov night. At a launch position well within Ukrainian-controlled territory, ATACMS fire missions execute. The M270 MLRS and HIMARS platforms that deliver ATACMS rounds in Ukrainian service have been refined through 4 years of combat employment into highly disciplined firing systems. Crews conduct their pre-launch sequences with the practiced efficiency of personnel who have executed hundreds of combat fire missions. Target coordinates verified. Fusing settings confirmed. Launcher alignment checked. 11:47 p.m. local time. First rounds away. ATACMS travels its ballistic arc at terminal velocities that make evasion irrelevant and early warning nearly useless for personnel in the target area. From launch to impact at 300 kilometers, flight time is approximately 7 to 9 minutes. The depot's air defense coverage. Whatever Russian systems were assigned to protect the Saratov logistics infrastructure was either absent, degraded, or simply unable to intercept the incoming rounds in the available window. 11:54 p.m. First impacts. The Ho-101 storage area receives the initial strike sequence. The warhead effects on a concentrated missile storage configuration are catastrophic and cascading, not just from direct impact energy, but from sympathetic detonations triggered in stored weapons propellant and warhead components. Satellite imagery reviewed in subsequent days showed the storage area as a crater complex, the organized rows of pre-staged missiles replaced by a debris field spread across several hundred meters. Secondary detonations continued for approximately 19 minutes after the initial impact sequence, as stored Ho-101 propellant cooked off in chain reaction. The storage configuration, which Ukrainian intelligence had assessed as containing approximately 58 cruise missiles in various stages of readiness, was functionally destroyed. The fuel distribution manifold took a direct hit in the second impact sequence. The manifold, a specialized logistics infrastructure piece that isn't simply replaced from standard military supply chains, collapsed. The 6 tanker vehicles connected to it at the time of impact were caught in the blast and fire effects. Post-strike assessment confirmed all 6 destroyed or non-operational. The fuel distribution capacity feeding Tu-95 preparations at Engels was gone. The mobile loading platforms on the eastern apron received the third impact sequence. 3 platforms confirmed destroyed. The fourth, positioned slightly outside the planned impact geometry, survived with assessed damage that rendered it non-operational pending repair. What do you think? Was the 11-day stand-down that followed this strike a conservative Russian damage assessment, or did it reflect genuine structural destruction Ukraine had achieved? Comment your analysis. 41 seconds from first impact to final detonation in the planned strike sequence. 73 days of intelligence work. 41 seconds of execution. The immediate Russian response, pieced together from intercepted communications assessed by Ukrainian intelligence in the hours and days following the strike, reflected exactly the kind of systemic shock the operation had been designed to produce. The Engels Air Base command element initially received fragmented reports that were difficult to interpret. The depot wasn't on the airfield itself, and the first information reaching base commanders came through civilian emergency channels and air defense reporting networks that weren't designed to characterize what had just happened. Here's the take that'll probably generate debate. Russia's decision to forward stage its Ho-101 inventory at a single facility was not simply a logistics mistake. It was a symptom of an institutional failure in how Russian military planning handles the tension between operational efficiency and survivability. Soviet-era logistics doctrine optimized for mass. Concentrate resources to move them faster. 21st century warfare punishes concentration. The Russian General Staff had 4 years of evidence demonstrating exactly this lesson, applied repeatedly to their own forces, and still authorized a supply chain structure that created a single point of failure for an entire strike package cycle. The stand-down that followed the May 29th strike lasted 11 days. Not because 11 days was the time required to administratively certify the damage. Russian engineering assessments of the depot were likely complete within 48 hours. 11 days was the time required to source replacement fuel distribution infrastructure, move replacement weapons inventory from dispersed storage to airfield accessible positions without recreating the depot vulnerability, and reconstitute the ground crew capacity lost in the strike. That last element deserves attention. Ground crew casualties at Tarkani were assessed as significant. The specialized technical personnel who conduct Ho-101 loading operations aren't drawn from the general military manpower pool. They're trained technicians whose skills represent years of development. Their loss wasn't simply a personnel casualty number. It was a reduction in the Russian Air Force's technical capacity to execute strike operations at tempo, even after equipment replacement. Ukrainian General Staff reporting in the days following the strike assessed the operational effect as the disruption of a planned sortie involving 12 Tu-95s aircraft and an estimated 96 Ho-101 cruise missiles. Approximately 60% of the pre-staged missile inventory was destroyed or rendered unrecoverable. The fuel distribution infrastructure disruption affected preparation timelines for all 12 aircraft, even after replacement sourcing was completed, because the operational rhythm that had made the 48-hour preparation cycle possible was broken. One detail that stuck when working through the strike assessment: the cost calculation. A single ATACMS round costs approximately $1.5 million. The strike at Tarkani employed an estimated 8 to 12 rounds. Call it $15 to $18 million in munitions expenditure. Against that, the Russians lost approximately 58 Ho-101 cruise missiles at roughly $3 to $4 million each, plus weapons loading infrastructure that cost tens of millions to source and position. The direct material exchange ratio runs roughly 12 to 1 in Ukraine's favor. That doesn't count the operational value of 11 days of grounded bare-H capacity, during which Ukrainian cities did not absorb cruise missile attacks. 12 to 1. In a war where resource efficiency determines long-term sustainability, that number matters enormously. But the raw material exchange ratio doesn't capture the full picture. This is where the real significance of the May 29th operation becomes clear. Russia's cruise missile campaign against Ukrainian infrastructure had, by spring 2026, settled into a predictable, if brutal, operational rhythm. Strike package every 12 to 14 days. Ukrainian air defense forward deployed to counter the inbound threat. Damage absorbed. Repairs begun. Population adapted. It was grinding and destructive, but it was a rhythm that both sides had calibrated around. The Tarkani strike broke that rhythm in a way that simple aircraft or missile losses couldn't. When you destroy aircraft, Russia replaces them from reserve inventory or production. When you intercept missiles in flight, Russia fires more. But when you destroy the logistical infrastructure that enables the strike cycle, and demonstrate that you can identify, characterize, and time a strike against exactly that infrastructure, you force a fundamental change in how Russia organizes its long-range aviation support chain. In the 11 days following the strike, Russian logistics planners faced a choice with no good option. Reconstitute the forward depot at Tarkani or a similar location and accept that Ukrainian intelligence would identify and strike it again. Disperse the pre-staging function across multiple smaller sites, reducing the efficiency gain that had motivated the depot concept in the first place. Or return to the original dispersed logistics chain and accept the longer preparation cycles that had been driving operational tempo problems before the depot was established. Satellite imagery in the weeks following the strike confirmed that Russia chose a hybrid approach, dispersal across 3 smaller sites, that partially restored preparation timelines but fundamentally changed the operational signature of the pre-strike cycle. That changed signature was harder to read, but it was also harder for Russian planners to optimize. The efficiency gains that had motivated the Tarkani depot were now redistributed across a more complex logistics structure that introduced its own friction and vulnerability. Ukraine did what the most effective military operations do. They didn't just destroy a target, they changed an adversary's behavior. What would NATO targeting doctrine have recommended differently? Concentrated suppression of the Engels airfield itself, or precisely the kind of logistics interdiction that Ukraine executed? Comment your analysis. The strike also carried implications for Russian long-range aviation survivability planning that extended beyond Engels itself. Russia maintained strategic bomber basing at multiple locations, including Olenya in the far north and Ukrainka in the Russian far east. The Engels vulnerability model, forward depot creation as an efficiency measure, depot vulnerability to precision interdiction, applies to any base where Russia attempts to accelerate strike tempo through pre-staging. Ukrainian intelligence demonstrated they could identify and exploit that vulnerability. Russian planners at other strategic aviation bases had to assume the same collection effort could be directed at them. Put yourself in the position of a Russian Air Force logistics officer in June 2026, briefing your commanding general on pre-staging procedures. Your forward depot just burned. 11 days of stand down. 58 cruise missiles turned into wreckage. You need to recommend a new logistics approach that maintains strike tempo without recreating the vulnerability. Every option involves either accepting reduced efficiency or accepting a different category of risk. What do you recommend? There's no clean answer, and that's precisely the strategic effect Ukraine intended. The May 29th operation was not Ukraine's first precision strike on Russian strategic aviation support infrastructure. Throughout 2025 and into 2026, Ukrainian long-range strike assets had engaged Engels Air Base directly on multiple occasions, targeting fuel storage, maintenance facilities, and in several reported instances, the aircraft themselves on the tarmac. Each of those strikes produced tactical effect: damage, disruption, forcing Russia to divert repair resources and conduct damage assessments. None achieved the operational impact of the Tarkani strike, because none engaged the logistics choke point at the optimal moment in the preparation cycle. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface, until you work through the intelligence discipline required to make it happen. Striking Engels directly, at any moment you have a viable attack window, seems intuitively more effective than waiting 73 days to strike a logistics depot 40 kilometers away at precisely the right moment in the preparation cycle. But the Tarkani operation achieved something direct airfield strikes hadn't. It didn't just damage the strike capacity. It disrupted the operational rhythm that Russia had spent months establishing. Rhythm is harder to reconstitute than equipment. Real tactics, real consequences, war vector. The pattern of life methodology that produced the Tarkani strike deserves its own analysis, because it reflects a maturation in Ukrainian intelligence operations with strategic implications beyond this single engagement. Pattern of life analysis. Persistent surveillance of a target to establish baseline behavioral signatures, identify deviations, and characterize operational cycles has been a staple of counterterrorism and special operations targeting for 2 decades. Its application to conventional military logistics interdiction at the scale Ukraine demonstrated against Tarkani is more recent and arguably more sophisticated. It requires not just collection assets capable of persistent observation, but an analytical infrastructure capable of integrating multi-source intelligence across extended time windows and a decision-making culture willing to hold a strike until the target's operational signature meets specific predefined criteria. Ukrainian intelligence had all three. And that combination, persistent collection, integrated analysis, disciplined patience, is a capability Russia has consistently failed to credit adequately. SIGINT played a specific role in building the Tarkany picture that satellite imagery alone couldn't provide. Communication intercepts associated with the depot's logistics coordination, fuel delivery scheduling, weapons transport manifests, ground crew duty rosters, allowed Ukrainian analysts to develop a real-time understanding of the facility's operational tempo that imagery could only confirm after the fact. When the May 27th pre-staging cycle began, SIGINT intercepts were providing near real-time awareness of the depot's loading status. The confirmation of 6 active manifold connections on the evening of May 28th came through signals analysis that crossed against imagery to provide high-confidence assessment of fuel truck positioning. Agent-sourced reporting contributed a dimension that technical collection couldn't reliably provide: operational intent. The question of whether a given movement signature at Tarkany represented routine logistics activity or a pre-strike preparation cycle was ultimately about human decisions inside the Russian command structure. Agent networks operating in the Saratov region provided reporting that, when integrated with technical collection, allowed the analysis cell to distinguish between maintenance cycle logistics and strike preparation logistics. Knowing not just what was moving, but why it was moving was operationally decisive. The fusion of these collection streams into a single actionable picture reflects a joint intelligence architecture Ukraine has developed through years of operational experience and Western partnership. U.S. intelligence sharing, a central component of Ukrainian targeting capability throughout the war, contributed satellite access and technical collection capacity that Ukraine's own organic systems couldn't have provided at the necessary scale. British and French intelligence partnerships added additional collection streams. The result was a multi-layered picture built on collection assets from multiple nations, integrated by Ukrainian analysts who understood the operational context. Will Russia successfully adapt its long-range aviation logistics to make this kind of pattern-of-life interdiction significantly harder in the next 12 months? Comment why yes or no. The operational evidence points in a specific direction, and we read every analysis. The Tarkany operation's effect on the strategic bombing campaign against Ukrainian cities was measurable and significant in the weeks that followed. During the 11-day stand-down, Ukrainian air defense networks maintained its sustained high alert through continuous Russian strike threats, were able to conduct maintenance cycles and personnel rotations that the prior operational tempo had been compressing. Patriot battery operators who had been running shortened rest cycles got full stand-downs. Interceptor aircraft that needed airframe inspections received them. The tactical readiness of Ukrainian air defense infrastructure improved during the pause. When Russian strike operations resumed after the 11-day stand-down, the first post-Tarkany sortie package employed a modified launch geometry and reduced aircraft count, assessed by Ukrainian analysis as reflecting both inventory depletion and operational caution following the depot strike. The 101 salvo was smaller, the tactical approach different, and the Ukrainian air defense network, rested and maintained through the pause, achieved intercept rates above the campaign average. The tactical lesson of Tarkany is this: in a prolonged attritional conflict, disrupting an adversary's operational rhythm can achieve effects that direct attrition of their equipment cannot. Russia had adapted to losing aircraft on the tarmac and missiles in flight. It had built logistics, structures, and production timelines around sustained losses. What it hadn't fully adapted to, and what the Tarkany strike exposed, was vulnerability in the procedural infrastructure that made strike operations efficient. Strike the rhythm, not just the equipment. The quiz answer. Ukrainian analysts assessed approximately 58 101 cruise missiles destroyed or rendered unrecoverable in the Tarkany depot strike. The assessment methodology combined pre-strike imagery, characterizing the storage configuration, post-strike damage assessment from satellite and collected imagery, and SIGINT indicators of Russian logistics coordination in the following weeks that reflected inventory depletion requiring resourcing from more distant storage facilities. 58 missiles at $3 to $4 million each represents material losses of $170 to $230 million, against an estimated $15 to $18 million ATACMS expenditure. That's the cost efficiency calculation that makes the Tarkany strike one of the most analytically significant single engagements of the entire war. Real tactics, real consequences, war vector. 3 questions to carry forward. Was the 73-day collection period, the patience required to hold the strike window until all 3 criteria were simultaneously met, the right operational decision, given the Russian missile attacks Ukrainian cities absorbed during that interval? Ukrainian planners would argue the 11-day stand-down achieved by striking at the optimal moment, versus a more modest disruption from striking at an imperfect window, justifies the patience calculus. The counter-argument, that every day of delay represented continued civilian casualties, is not easily dismissed. This is the hardest category of decision in warfare, trading present harm for potentially decisive future effect. Could Russia have prevented the Tarkany strike? The forward depot concept was tactically rational under Russian operational planning assumptions. But those assumptions failed to account for the depth of Ukrainian intelligence penetration of their logistics patterns. The preventive measures that would have disrupted Ukrainian collection, more frequent changes to communication protocols, more irregular logistics movement patterns, better counterintelligence discipline around the depot facility, were available but not implemented consistently enough to break the pattern of life picture. Russia could have made the Tarkany targeting process significantly harder. They didn't. What would you have done differently if you were the Ukrainian General Staff Intelligence Chief, standing at the decision point on May 28th when the third pre-staging criteria was confirmed? Strike with the window you have, or wait one more cycle to confirm the pattern holds? One decision is aggressive and potentially decisive. The other is cautious and potentially a missed opportunity. There's no clean answer. And in the fog of those decisions, wars are made and broken. Subscribe to War Vector, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The Tarkany depot is quiet now. The crater field from the May 29th strike has been documented by satellite imagery, a silent record of 41 seconds that redirected the operational trajectory of Russia's long-range aviation campaign. The Tu-95s still fly. The 101s still launch. But Russia launches them from a more complex, less efficient logistics baseline, under awareness that Ukrainian intelligence can identify and engage the procedural choke points that make those operations viable. That awareness is itself a victory, not the kind that appears on a frontline map. The kind that accumulates, engagement by engagement, into the grinding strategic advantage that decides prolonged conflicts. Modern warfare punishes tactical mistakes without mercy, and it rewards analytical patience with exactly the kind of decisive, outsized effect that the Tarkany strike produced. Stay vigilant.